Hi there. Now, this is the second of our release videos. As in the first one, I invited Joran Bowers from the product team to show us the coolest features of 3.13. While there is the new flowable design coming up soon, was there any time to work on other things?
Hey, hi Valentin, and thanks for having me again. Yes, actually, I mean, our team has been focused on new design indeed, but at the same time, we have other people that have been working on the 3.13 release. There has been a lot of things going on, both in backend and in frontend. Lots of things have been polished compared to previous release, and yeah, it's just a good release to, yeah, as always, upgrade to the latest and greatest, right?
What is your favorite feature in the 3.13 release?
Well, I'm a bit biased because at the Flowfest, the online conference we did last month, I did talk about scripting, and you'll see in the 3.13 release there is a lot of new things around scripting. So yeah, for me, it's definitely one of my most favorite features. But yeah, I'm a bit biased again, right?
So, we are also going to start with that one, or what shall
Yeah,
we
perfect.
do?
Yeah, let's start with that one. That's the freshest in my mind.
I personally never liked the script task. Why is scripting so important to you?
That's a very good question. It's indeed true. The script ask has been in there for years. It's one of the first behaviors that we added to the engines. What we've seen these days is that, well, we have a lot of customers asking for it. But on the other hand, we also see the deployment models have changed tremendously over the last years. I mean, without going into details here, there's a whole Docker Kubernetes story where changing the class path, like we used to do years ago, just isn't as easy or feasible or wanted anymore. On top of that, we have a lot of customers who are running things on the cloud, be it a private cloud or a public cloud, doesn't matter. But there it's way harder to change things like the class path. And then scripting, when appropriately used, makes a lot of sense. And that's why in 3.13, we have been adding lots of features around scripting, and there is plenty more to come in the next releases.
So that sounds like the script task is not the way to go when you say that there are better
No,
ways
that's
to
correct.
actually do scripting.
Yeah,
So, what
yeah,
can you
yeah,
show me
yeah.
around that?
Good. I prepared a little demo because I knew you were going to ask that question. So let me go to Flowable Design. And here it is. So the way to go about that is you encapsulate your script in a service model. We've always have had service models for REST, for expressions, but we added script support in the 3.12 release. But we now expanded on that, and I will show you what that means. So let me just open up my process here. So this is a very simple thing. Now, don't worry it. I'm going to show you piece by piece what happens here. But you can see here we're using a service registry model. So if I now go into that one.
Before we go into that detail
Mhm.
there, is there any input which we have for our process model?
Oh yeah, sorry, good that you ask. So basically, I've got a very simple start form. It has something called prefix, a
Mhm.
random date because you know I'm very bad at choosing names, so I just named it
Mm.
what it was, and then the text list, which is going to collect something in the items variable,
Mhm.
and that's indeed the data that we're working for, and that's the data that we're going to map into this first two
Mhm.
uppercase, and you can already guess what it's going to do, right? Into the two uppercase service operation.
Okay.
So let
It
me, oops,
makes
sorry.
something uppercase, I guess.
Yes, exactly. Again, I'm not very good at naming things. One of the hardest problems, right,
Yeah.
of coding. So the two uppercase operation takes an input, that's the text, and we're going to map the start form text
Mhm.
into this one here, and it's going to output something called uppercase text, which, you know, as the name
Mhm.
implied, is very simple.
Yeah.
Now, it's a very simple thing, and that this is the first step, and it's deliberately very simple because I want to highlight two things here. Well, three actually. So what we're doing here in the first line, again, this is new, right? So before we had expression, we had rest, and now you can do script.
Yeah.
This was already in 3.12, but we've really expanded on this in 3.13. We added something called flw.getInput.
Mhm.
So the idea is that all of the operations, all the functions that we expose in scripts, they're under the FLW namespace. So you will see things like get input, get set output, but then we also have things which are namespace depending on, you know, what kind of functions they are. In this case, the function that we use to uppercase a thing is in the string namespace. Now, this
Sounds
FLW.
Sounds like there's more inside the flw.string or
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. There's way more. I mean, this is now to uppercase. We have contains. We have join, split. I mean, there's 20, 30 functions easily. So, I mean,
Mhm.
way too much. If you're interested in that, the Flowfest talk that I mentioned before, that's where we really showcase all of these functions. And in the documentation in the 3.13 release, you will get to read all of these nice new functions. And there's way more than string, which we'll talk about in a second. Now, going back to the get inputs, you might think that, yeah, I mean, I already have the text parameter here, so why do I need to do that? Now, the cool thing is that this works everywhere. So it works in the service registry model, but it also works in the script task, it works in the execution listener, it works wherever you want to kind of reference an input. The FLW get input API, because this is really an API, will work and it will know, hey, I'm running in a case, I'm running a process, I'm running somewhere else, and it will do the right thing without you having to worry about calling the right API, as you would have to do before we had this. Similarly, all of these methods, like to uppercase, they are APIs. So meaning that in the next releases, we will not change this. You don't need to worry about the implementation details. To uppercase will always do what we promise it to do as we document it. And the hard part in the script is that you don't have a compiler to check these things. So we give a guarantee that we won't change these things in the next releases. So if you build your processes, your process or case models, we won't change these APIs. They will keep working as they have been working. And that's really important when you're in the scripting world. So it's really something that we've cast into stone, so to say. Anyway, that's the first thing that happens here. And let me have a look at what the second thing is. It's probably a bit more advanced. So the second thing is that, remember that random date variable that I had on my start
yeah.
form? So now I'm going to call the calculate date difference here. So let me go to that one. We
So
close
you
this one
have
again.
here multiple operations in one service model
Yeah,
and you can call.
exactly. As you see here, there is no limit into how many operations you add to a service. This is really like a typical, if you would write code, a typical clause or something where you have multiple methods depending on the context. It's really to encapsulate everything that belongs together into one service model. That's really the idea. And going now into the calculate date difference, I mean, there is one input, which obviously is a date. And what we do here, and this is just to kind of showcase what we have, the difference in days and the difference in seconds. And again, what you see here is we're getting the input with our FLW get input method. We're now calling another function in the time namespace. So here, FLW.time is giving me the current date by calling the now function. That's giving us what the time is today. And then we're calling, dot time, seconds between, current date, and the date that we put into the start form, and same for the days. Now, this is just one method. There is way more. There is all kind of methods to convert from dates into, let's say, instance, local dates. There is things to calculate, to add, like plus, minus, comparison. I mean, every programmer knows that working with dates is always a joy, and we added lots of
Yeah.
functions there. Again, interested in that, have a look at our documentation. I mean, let's not go over the API. That will be extremely boring. Thing is, we expose this in the scripts, and as a user, you don't need to worry at all about the implementation. The API is giving you the seconds between a certain two dates, and that's it. How it's implemented, it's not your problem. And we will make sure that this works in every of the upcoming releases. So that's the second little script that we have. And then thirdly, this is a bit more an advanced one because, third step, we can
Yeah.
we're way smarter now at this point. So we're going to convert all of this into a JSON object. So let's have a look how that looks
Yeah.
like.
So you are creating now a new JSON object based on
Yeah,
your list of strings or
correct. So there's plenty of input variables here. I'll show you in a sec that
Mhm.
we're also mapping this in the process model. So we're getting in that list of items that was on the start form. We're getting in the prefix. We're getting in the input date, that random date, and then the difference that we calculate. Again,
Mhm.
this is not a very business kind of use casey example. It's it's made by technical people, as you can see. We're gathering these variables, and we're going to output a JSON object. So
Okay.
what we're going to
So
do here, and
we use now here parts of the outputs which you have had before, but not all of them. So you can basically
exactly,
plug it together
exactly.
as you want.
And that's really where scripting is very useful for, right? I mean, you are fiddling with things, you're throwing things together, and that's where scripting are, perfectly suited for. So what we do here, and this is another namespace, is the JSON
Mhm.
namespace. What we're doing here to start with is we create something called the result variable, and we're creating an array here. Now, this is a JSON array because we're under the JSON
Mhm.
namespace, right? So this will be an array where we will put our stuff in. Another kind of namespace that we didn't talk about before is the format namespace. So here we're doing
Mhm.
something that, again, in reality, in all business use cases, you're going to have date formatting because that's what end users expect you to do. So what we did here is using the one natural kind of format that there is in the world, right? Year,
Yeah.
month, day. If everybody would use that, things would be simple, but the world is not simple, as we know. So we're getting this input date, we're formatting into something we like and put into the variable. Then what we're going to do is we're going to get that list of items, from the input
Mhm.
parameters above, and we're going to create an iterator. Now, if you don't know what an iterator is, it's basically is a helper that will help you to loop over, to iterate over something, right? Because this is
Mhm.
a list of things. This iterator will help us. So we're storing that in a little variable, and then we're going to loop. This is a while loop. As long as this iterator has new elements,
Mhm.
it's just going to keep looping. So next line, what we're going to do is we're going to get the next element from this, again, this iterator. And then what we're going to do, we're going to add an object, right? This is an array, right? This is something that we give as an API. There is a method called add object, which is going to add a JSON object. Again, creating under the JSON namespace using the create object function to create a new object, adding them to the array. And then what we do here is adding the data, right? So we're getting the input, we're concatenating with the item that we put in, and then we're going to put the difference in day in and the format of day, just to have
So
something, right? I mean,
that basically now allows us to create a new list of objects out of
correct,
our previous input. Would we also be
correct.
able to pass an existing more complex structure and create another more complex structure out of
Yeah,
that?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So there's definitely, I mean, there's functions in the JSON namespace, in the kind of string namespace, where you can go back and forth between strings and JSONs, as a lot of people every day do in Flowable. I mean, yeah, your imagination is really the limitation there. You can do all kind of crazy things in scripting. I'm not advising that, but it will happen, of course. So there we go. Last thing that I want to mention is this one here, which might seem odd. So here, this is like the get inputs. It is setting the output. This works in every of the places that we expose scripting capabilities, meaning I can call this also in a regular script task. I can, some of the things we will show later in this meeting is that we will be able to call it, and the API knows behind the scenes where we are. So I don't need to call like case instance dot set variable as I would normally have to do in a
Mhm.
script task in a CMN model. That doesn't exist anymore if I do set output. The API is smart enough to know what to do. And the good thing is that I can reuse this script now between BPMN, CMN, or other places, right? Because the set output will then, depending on the context, call the right thing behind the scenes, and I can really have reusable scripts in a service model that can be used wherever I want it to be used.
So
So
basically, what we did is we have had a long script that we split up in small
yeah,
parts, which are now
yeah,
reusable across BPMN and
correct.
CMMN
Correct.
models.
Yes, I mean, I'm now referencing here in BPMN this particular
Mhm.
service model, but I can just use this service model in CMN and it would work just the same. There's no difference anymore. And in the past, you sometimes would have to know, like, oh, I'm running this in a case or a process model, and things
Yeah.
would be different. That's all. That's all in the past now. So that's something really, really cool, I think.
So, for example, we could now also create an, for example, simple BPMN file, which we are using just to test our script
Yeah.
out, outside of the entire context and provide some input data and expected outputs.
Exactly, exactly. That's actually that's funny you mentioned because that's one of the next steps that we will work on. I mean, it's not going to be in
Mhm.
3.13, but it's definitely on the roadmap for the future. Because if we now have kind of said this is the input, this is the output, you can really
Yeah.
take it out and test it in isolation because you know that if I put this set of input in, this is the
Hmm.
expected output, right? So it can even
Yeah.
run somewhere on a different server for all we
Yeah.
know, right? And that's something we're going to work on in the future because it's really powerful that you can, from here, make unit tests, right? That you know that,
Hmm.
oh, I'm changing something, it still all works as I expect, right? You don't want to always kind of go back and forth between the runtime and design for writing scripts, right?
That
But that will come in the
makes
future.
sense. Now, maybe the exciting part, how does it look like when we are going to execute it?
Yeah, I mean, it's just going to work, right? Because I prepared this beforehand. But let me publish it, and let's see what happens. And I'm going to use inspect simply because then we can step through the different things and see how we're building up kind of the data. So I just published it to work, and if I now would run it, I mean, this is already a teaser for later, but we're going to run this one now.
Test mode.
Yeah. And the prefix would be like something like test, the random date, let's say 24 December, doesn't matter. And let's add like maybe just 2 items in our list, 1, 2. Again, we're not very creative here, but let's see what happens. All right, this runs. Let's open up inspect. I should have opened it up beforehand. So we're now at the start. Just, you can see if you zoom in, we're at the start of our process. Let's just, continue by
step by step.
Step by step. We're now at the start of the first registry, service registry task. Let's continue.
So that is now making our text uppercase, which we already have.
Yeah. I mean, the text right now, let's have a quick look at the variables. Here's a prefix, right? It's not uppercase, it's lowercase. So let's continue. Here we go. We're now at the end. If all things work well, you should now have a uppercase test, which is here, right? All great. Then we continue. Nothing's going to happen here because we're now at the start of the second step. And
now
here we go.
And now we should have the days until Christmas.
Exactly, yes.
Oh, that's going to be soon.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus, time flies. Yeah. Okay. So we now have these data variables that we calculated, and if all things went well, we continue. We're now at the more elaborate step, and let's continue and see what data we have. Yeah. Well, it didn't crash, so here we go. And the result object, right? I didn't show you the mappings, but I mean, there is nothing really going on here. I'm mapping in the start form. I'm in all kind of variables. I mean, there's not much to show here, just that I'm mapping things
here. Maybe
here.
The interesting part is that we mapped outputs from the previous steps into that step. So we are reusing the results from.
Yeah, exactly. For example, I'm using the uppercase prefix, which is actually a result from this one here, right? So this is the output from this particular invocation. I'm storing it in the uppercase prefix, and then I'm reusing it here. So that's how it works. And as you can see, right, the whole thing just created now, as we expected. I put in 2 items, uppercase plus, and then the random data that we put in, right? Yeah. So, I mean, this is really just to show a kind of touching what is possible with the new scripting APIs in Flowable. Again, check the Flowfest video, check the documentation. Once 3.13 is out there, it will be online. And, there's a lot of more things than what is in here.
I mean, that's really cool. We spent already a lot of time on scripting, but maybe quickly look also what you prepared around the HTTP
good point.
with scripting.
Yeah. So one of the things that we want to do, and we started doing that in 3.13, is adding scripting capabilities where it makes sense. And there's a lot of places where it makes sense. I mean, we now did the most obvious ones, but the Flowable has a lot of pluggability points where, right now you would have to put some Java class on the class path and implement a certain interface. But, in the future, we will also make it possible to have scripts there because it just makes sense for many use cases not to, always go to Java. So let me show you the example. Now, the example is a bit more complex. So let me just quickly show you what it does. And here it is. So this is it's a fake REST API. I'm using a tool here that basically gives me on port, what is it, 3000. It gives me, and I could just actually call this one here, localhost 3000. Oops, and it's /third party API, I think, if I didn't make a typo. There it is, right?
Looks good.
Well, no, it doesn't, because it's actually a rubbish API, right? If you look at it, if you would build it like this, it wouldn't make any sense. And that's the point. So this API, let's say it's an old API that somebody back in the 90s wrote. I mean, JSON REST didn't exist then. But, so it's like an API for issues, but it's weird in the sense that the issues are here, but then it uses like 1, 2, 3, which normally should be an array, right? It has a title, okay, that's fine. But then it has like an info field. It says valid issues are these numbers, these identifiers. Normally you would put like a Boolean flag in the JSON up here. And same for the priorities, right? So it's not an API that's easy to work with. Actually, if you would use this directly in a process or a CMN model, it wouldn't be that easy to work or use directly.
Mhm.
And that's where the feature I want to show you now really shines. So let me, oops, I've zoomed in, of course. So I'm going to call the process from a high level point of view. I'm going to call that third party API. And then for
Mhm.
each of the valid issues, I want to have a I have a user task. I'm using a multi-instance construct. I'm going to have one user task with the title and the, the priority mapped here.
But how do you do that since you don't have anything related to
Correct.
conversion there and you can only
Exactly.
iterate it through lists? Or?
Exactly. That's exactly where the scripting kind of is very useful. So I have here a service model. It's a REST service model. It's mapped to, as you can see, localhost 3000. And I have only one operation mapped to the third-party API is doing a
Mhm.
get. And it's outputting a result, just a JSON,
Mhm.
right? Nothing more than that. And we're using some of the things that I showed before. Let me quickly show you what I'm doing here. So there's a bit of helper text here, but the important part is that we have the ability to get our full REST response in the script, right? By
Mhm.
calling the FLW HTTP response. So what I'm doing here, like before, I'm creating a JSON array, and then I'm parsing the body from that
Mhm.
response that's available here for me. I'm parsing that to JSON.
So that means in addition to the body, you would also have, for example, headers available.
Yes. Yes, everything that you normally would have on a response, if you open up your Chrome or your Firefox or whatever and inspect the network tab, everything that's in there you can access here on this FLW HTTP response. So it's super useful. So what I'm doing here now is I'm getting the body, and then, this is also interesting, I'm creating again an iterator, as you can see, but
Mhm.
I'm also using something called pod. And pod is pretty cool because what I'm doing now is remember that bad API. So what I'm doing now actually is I'm looking into the info and I'm going into the valid issues, right? So what I'm doing is,
Mhm.
hey, step into this one, step into this one, and now I have an array, right? Which I can then have the
Okay.
identifiers to go into the issues. That list,
S-
it's not a list, right?
s-
Into the issues object before,
So
right?
rather than iterating through the issues, you iterate through the valid items, and then you are
Exactly.
next going to look up the
Correct.
issues for that.
Yeah. So what I'm doing here, I'm again using the iterator. I'm going to get the ID out of that one, which is just the number right here,
Mhm.
and I'm going to get the issue. I'm going to get that out of the body, right? It's the other object, and I'm going to use the ID from the valid issues to find that exact issue.
Mhm.
Same thing for the priority. Now looking into the other list here, or the other
Yeah.
object. Actually, it's not a list; it's an object. Looking there and getting it all together. Then what I'm doing, if priority is higher than 50, just something I had just to
Yeah.
showcase that's possible. And like before, I'm adding now an object to my output. And that's pretty much it, right? In the end, I have a list of
Yeah.
issues and that's it. So I know you're dying to see this running. So
Exactly. You got it.
let's run this. I already published it before, so I don't need to
Yeah.
publish it.
It's in the same app,
So
so we published everything together. Or
exactly correct. So if I now run this, it's going to call this REST API that's running on my
Mhm.
fake server, and it's going to create all of these user tasks for me behind the scenes.
Mhm.
And here we go. I've got 3 user tasks. These are the ones who have more than 50 for the priority and
Yeah.
which are valid, which is what our script wanted to do. So the cool thing is that somebody could have made this service, right? This bad service,
Mhm.
let's call it, and then people could actually use it as if it was a service who had a natural or more sane response. And you don't need to worry in my PPMN model. I don't care about the fact that this REST response was actually not in the correct format, and I don't care about it if I'm writing my PPMN model, right? So that's a really powerful feature.
So I have seen you can also work with the request. So, for example, for authentication, that might be helpful.
Correct.
Is there
Correct.
anything to specify that for the entire service model, or how would you do that?
Well, there is a lot of kind of things here. So indeed, I mean, if you would have to go into the request and always go in here and say like script and then start to type your script
Mhm.
here, if you have multiple operations, that's going to be a lot of copy pasting. So we have the kind of on the root level, same like we have the shared output mapping. You can say like, hey, I've got a root request response hello, and if I put something here, this is going to be applied to all of the operations below. So that's a really powerful feature that a lot, yeah, doesn't need you to copy paste all of your kind of
Yeah.
you're using the authentication headers, right, to add like the authentication headers here to the to the service. Yeah.
Okay, that's really nice. I know that you love scripting, and I mean, I actually also get exciting about scripting. Before we move to the next topics, what
Mhm.
other places you can use together with scripting? Maybe we just talk a little bit about that since we
Oh yeah,
spent
yeah, yeah,
already a
yeah.
few minutes
Yeah.
about demoing the
Yeah, good
stuff
point.
on.
Let me quickly just show you. So one of the best example is example action. It's an action model. So
Hmm.
actions are used a lot actually by many customers to add customized actions into Flowable work to do
Yeah,
things within a certain context. Very
yeah.
powerful feature. And there is now here a little
Of,
checkbox.
often on dashboards, I believe, and sometimes
Exactly.
also inside the case or the
Exactly,
process.
exactly. I mean, you can do because there's right now there's a Java API that you need to implement. You can
Yeah.
do pretty much everything because you can call the whole platform within that action and really do some advanced stuff. And with the 3.13 release, you don't need to do any class path, any Java anymore. You can actually write a script right here in design and have an action like you would have
So I
before.
no longer need to implement the bot service. Now I can directly
Correct.
do that in Flowable itself.
Exactly. Exactly. Which is very powerful. Yeah.
That's cool. So thank you for that one. So let's move on to the next topic. The next topic is actually error handling. Continuing with the scripts, what do we have around scripting and error handling, specifically about the BPMN error event?
Right. It's a good question. So error handling is quite important in BPMN. I made a small example to kind of highlight this. So let me quickly show you. I have the BPMN model. I mean, the example is, yeah, again, a very simple one, but it gives you the point, right? So in BPMN, handling business errors is something you want to see visually because, of course, you want to think about it. You want to reason about it when you're discussing this with the business people, right? Now, what I did here is continuing from what we were talking about before. I have a service registry task. In there, I have a script operation. And as you can see, the name says I accept only 42. So it takes a number as input. And then it's going to take that number again, like we did before with the FLW get input. And if the number is lower than 42, it's going to throw a specific error, right? This is the error code, as we call it in BPMN. And otherwise, it's going to throw another error, right? The larger than 42. So this is an important kind of pattern. I mean, scripts are excellent when you have to do like these smaller validations. You want to check input data coming from a form or from third-party services. And then having a simple script like this really speeds up the modeling. So in this particular BPMN model, we're calling it, and if we catch this one here, the on the boundary of the service registry task, we're going to map it into. This is also a new 3.13 feature. We're going to map it into an error variable, right? So we're going to map it in something called error code. And as you can see here, if it's not 42, we're actually using that error code variable now to generate the task name at runtime, right?
So
So let's
previously, when you would like to do that, you would need to go ahead and have two error boundary events, I guess,
correct,
one for the smaller
correct.
than and one for the larger than,
Yes,
and then two
yes.
dedicated user tasks. Now you have the information, which one it is also
Yeah, so you
available.
can do whatever you want, right? You could actually do some really elaborate handling depending on the kind of error that's happening, right? And do lots of mapping in between. Absolutely. So let me show you how that looks like. I mean, it's not a very
Mhm.
engaging demo, I would say, but it gets the point across, right? That you can throw again from the specific namespace, right? We talked about namespaces in scripts before,
Yeah.
and let's run it. So random number. I'm going to say 43 now.
Hmm?
And
And
you see
now,
that it's being handled, right? It is actually, if I go into this one here, it's being called on the boundary and it goes into the not 42. And as you saw, it's actually mapping that error code into a variable and I can use it. So, I mean, it's a small nifty thing, but it's definitely very helpful to make your BPMN models way more visual, way more useful to reason about business errors than before.
that's really nice. As far as I recall, there are also some improvement around data objects, since before it
Right.
was not possible to handle errors at all there, or how was it before?
Correct. Correct. I mean, you could do things there, but they were, quite low level and not that user friendly, to be honest. So we improved that in the 3.13 release. So let me quickly show you what I mean with that. So what I have here, let me just show you the data object. Very simple data object. It has an ID, a title, and a priority as it's the service before. And you can see that on my local system, I have a very simple REST API that simply returns some mock data, right? So this is bound to a standard service model over REST. Nothing special here. This is all auto-generated, has the four classic operations you always get. I didn't do anything here, but I'm using it in the process. So if I go now to my process, what I do here is I have a start event. In that, I gather some data. Again, for demo purposes, I simply put the data object ID in here. Don't do that in production, not a good practice, but just to get the point across today, that's what we do. So I put it in, and then I'm going to look it up. So I linked it here with my issue data object, and I configured it simply to copy the variable from my start form, map it into this particular operation ID field. If all goes well, I'm going to display this on the screen simply in a form that is going to show the title and the priority. That's it. And if things go wrong, we here have an event subprocess. But let's first see what happens. So here we go, publish it, and let's start it. Data object error example. And if I do one, again, this is the one that doesn't have an error, right? So
So
if I
that
submit it,
should return us basically the.
exactly.
There we go.
There you
Title
go.
and
So
priority.
it got the information from the backend REST service and populates now our form as we expected, right? Nothing fancy. Now, what is new, as I was saying before, is that now I can actually here have catch the error in the event subprocess. I could also put it here on the boundary, but we had it in the previous example, so I thought let's put it now in the event subprocess. Map it into the my error code, and then handle the error. If I do that, and on my demo kind of setup, the /2 gives me a 500, I believe. Let me try that. Again,
Okay.
gives me here a 500. So bad things happen. So if I now do the same thing and put in 2, you can now see that we actually went into the handle error user task, and looking at my PPMN diagram, you can actually see that during the lookup issue step, it's now went into the event subprocess, and we're now here at the handle error. Right? So the whole thing works in a really visual way, which was not possible before with data objects and
When
handling
you
errors.
open Flowable Inspect, then you should also see basically that it was on 500
Yes.
error code.
Yes.
Leave. Oh,
Yes. Here you go. Right. So
okay.
there's a bit of a pattern going on here. So it's going to use the operation key, so the find by ID operation key, and then it's going to add the 500. This is to kind of differentiate if you have multiple operations going on the same model, and a way more complex model can actually inspect it and differentiate based on that. Now, there's one caveat I would have to mention. You can't handle the 404 by this. The reason for that is that the 404 actually has a specific meaning that it can't be found, and the engine will actually handle it that the data object is not there, and it won't crash, or it won't throw an exception or something. So you can't catch 404s with this. If you want to do that, you would actually have to use like a classic null check, or it doesn't exist, a kind of check like we had before. That already worked in the releases before 3.13. But for the rest, any other kind of 400, 4x thing, or 5x or whatever will work like this. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Joram. Then let's move to the next topic, which I think is around front-end improvements. A feature a lot of people asked for is export for data tables. I already know that you have good news. Can you show us what we need to do to have our data table exportable and how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. Indeed, it's one of the most requested features for a while, and very happy that it landed in 3.13. It's super easy to configure. Let me quickly show you. I have a small app. There's no process or CMN model. I just use the page to get the idea across. In this page, I have a very simple data table. I hooked it up with a REST API that's running locally, the one that we were using before. It will generate some random data. It's not important for this demo. But what is important is that there is now a new property, a new flag, that if you check it, it will render an export button. And just on the right-hand side at the top, there will be a button, and that's pretty much it. Nothing more.
So no complex configuration, just that checkbox and you're fine.
That's it, right? So let me show
That's
you how
nice.
that looks like. and let's go to work, refresh to get the page visible. It's down there. And this is the random data from our REST API. But what's important here is that we now have a button here to export. And if I click it, as you can
That,
see,
that file actually we can't see since it's behind
ah,
you.
oh, okay, you have to trust me that I clicked it.
Hmm.
And when
Yeah,
I click it, you can see it renders now, or it opens now in my tool to open
yeah,
CSVs. Now, I'm on a Mac system, so it's going to open up the default Mac application for
hmm,
CSVs. If you use Windows or you installed
yeah,
your Mac to use Excel, it will open up in Excel and you can do whatever you want
yeah.
with it on your local file system. So that's really it, nothing more. It's super easy to use.
Okay, your use case here is really simple. You just have 10 rows. What is when you have
Correct.
more data and you have, for example, pagination enabled?
Right, right. So the idea is that you, as a user, you can configure what gets exported. So what you see on the screen will be also exported. So if you applied filters, if you've sorted in a specific way, that will also be the data that's exported into the CSV. So if you're on a certain page, that will be exported. That's kind of how it works. Yeah,
So even when I go ahead and sort the columns or hide one column, it will be also applied then
correct,
when I export
correct.
it.
That's exactly how it works.
That's
Yep.
nice.
Yeah.
I think you have something else to show us.
Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's may look funny, but it's one of also most requested features is to add icons to buttons. I mean, people use buttons a lot in
Hmm.
all kind of varying use cases, and one of the things that's been asked a lot is customized icons. So what we did in 313, let me open up a quick process with a
Hmm.
task and there a form. We added, this is a button group with a couple of buttons. We added a new property, Font
Hmm.
Awesome icon name. Now, Font Awesome is a well-known, popular icon library.
Yeah.
If you go to the internet and go to website, you can see there's a lot of icons in there. And if you just want to, open up any icon, let's, for example, the star, you simply
Hmm.
put in this name, and that's it. Now, we didn't add the whole list to design because, as you can see, there's
Yeah.
a ton of icons there, and it changes all the time. So you have to copy it
Al-
like that.
Almost 20,000 icons. That's
Exactly.
definitely a lot.
Exactly. So, in this demo, I added, what is this here? A hippo, a cat, because everybody loves
Hmm.
cats, a dragon, a steering wheel, and a chess queen. I mean, it's not really
Yeah,
enterprise, but
but
gets
a
the
lot
idea
of
across.
different things, and I mean,
Exactly.
there's more what you
Here we
can
go.
use.
Let me publish it and see how it looks like. Here we go. Goes into this task. And you can see I've got a hippo, a cat, a dragon, and all the rest, right? I mean, it's kind of works as you expect.
How is it when you would like to have some text in addition to that icon? Does
But
it
it's just the
work as
same. I
before?
mean, yeah.
Yeah,
Just like
nothing
before, you
changed
simply add
there.
the text and nothing changed there. So,
And also
uh,
the functionality is basically
yeah,
as it was before. You
yeah.
now only
Yeah,
need
I
the
didn't
option to
bother
show
now
it.
with adding. Yeah, exactly. Didn't bother with adding anything here to logical wise because it's a front end only thing. But whatever worked before, how complex? Because people do complex things with buttons.
Yeah,
It just keeps on working. But now with the with the hippo on the button.
yeah. Cool. Then let's go to the next topic.
All right, Valentin, time to shake things around. One of the things that we also did in 313 is we expanded upon the OAuth 2.0 support. And I know that you've been working on a demo for that, right?
Yes, indeed. So previously this year, I did a video about LDAP, and then I tried to basically reuse that LDAP integration for having OAuth. So I just went ahead and configured inside here Keycloak my LDAP to sync all the users. So now I have those users in LDAP. And then I thought, Jane, don't. Then I thought, yeah, maybe I just log in with that user. Now, as it was in 3.12, you can just log in with Jane Doe here and say test. But once I logged in and I see a 404, and the reason is because I didn't map any groups and so on. Now, I could go ahead and keycloak and configure everything, but it would be also nice when I would be able to do that in Flowable. And therefore, we introduced a few properties. And I'm just going to enable those and then restart while we can talk about those properties.
I think in reality, you also want to map these to existing stuff in LDAP, right? You don't want to
Yeah.
add more stuff to it, but I mean, it's you can do it, but it's more useful if you can reuse what's already there because most likely it's already been set up beforehand, right?
Indeed. So what we are doing here is now we say we would like to load all the information for our OAuth user from the identity service, which for
Mhm.
us now is LDAP, but could be any other service. So rather than configuring that twice, we now say, yeah, we just refer to what we have in OAuth to use it also here.
Right,
So that is one of the main points which we changed here. And in addition to that, we also said, yeah, the user definition should be rather based on the group key which we have. And then we are doing a lookup based on that. You can use both of them independently, actually. So you don't need to use both together. So you could say
right,
you are just mapping the user definition key and so on, and the other way
right,
around.
right. And that way in Flowable, because we use the concept of a user definition giving certain access to things, certain features, you map it to something that's already pre-configured in LDAP and things gets managed there, right? Which makes things
Exactly.
easier. Yeah,
So it
cool.
just restarted, so we can go back. So when I just go here back to the login screen, it now uses single sign on. So I might be directly signed in since my
Yeah.
keycloak is working in the background. And let's open that endpoint again. But you see already here, I see a lot of information. I
Mhm.
see the
Yeah.
groups which are coming from LDAP in here, which are exposed, as well as the user definition in here. We
Mhm.
can also sign in as another user, and therefore I first need to sign out. So let's quickly sign out. And that is actually something which was added in 3.12,
Yeah, correct.
that we have that sign on redirect.
Yeah, it's also a
And
feature that was massively requested. Yeah.
yeah, and our John is just a reporting user. So you see, you have way less than what we have
Mhm.
had before. And that is based on the user definition, which we now see as user reporting.
Cool. Cool. Cool.
Okay.
All right, super. That looks, I mean, super useful and looking forward to that new how-to then based on all that new information.
Yeah, that is definitely coming soon. Okay, there are way more things which are coming up with 3.13. Joam, what else would you
Mhm.
like to mention?
Good question. I mean, there's a lot of things left and right that we've improved. So I handpicked a few kind of highlights that are also easily demoable. The first one is support for AWS SNS, and this is about the channels. So if I just quickly show this on the screen and I create a new channel, let's call this one SNS example. And SNS is only about inbound. You can't have outbound. You can't have an inbound SNS configuration. So I can now select SNS here, and there's a lot of settings that you can then have to fill in once you hook it up with that service from Amazon. But the point is that this is kind of like a segue service into the whole Amazon ecosystem. So SNS often is the kind of the front in which you publish a message. And let me just scroll down a bit. I mean, they have a slide here on the page where whatever kind of Amazon service is behind it can react to that kind of SMS message. So you can see here, right, like with SMS, mobile push, and stuff like that. So it's really a rich kind of ecosystem that we're unlocking by supporting SNS.
So in the
Um,
background, I think with SNS, you can, for example, push a message to SQS and then even consume it with Flowable again.
yeah,
Or
yeah,
you
yeah,
could
yeah. It's all up to you. Exactly.
start an AWS Lambda or send out an email. I think all of those are things which
Yeah,
you can do with SNS.
absolutely. All the services, all pretty much all the services from AWS, they kind of hook into SNS at one way or the other. So it's really unlocking the potential for many more integrations that we've done here with this particular channel that we now have. And speaking about channels, the other one that I wanted to highlight was, I mean, we have had the email channel.
Hmm.
Just quickly create one email channel for a long time, and
Yeah.
it's nothing particularly interesting about this one here. But a lot of our customers are running Flowable on Azure, and if you're using also email on Azure and all of the services about SSO and all that stuff on Azure, they are changing things here. If you're running on Azure, I'd definitely check those blogs. We've linked to them in our own Flowable blogs.
Hmm.
But basically, the gist of it is that they don't support basic auth anymore in a couple of weeks from now. And there is a new pattern. It's kind of like OAuth with some kind of specialities. Doesn't really matter for this presentation. The point is that we've changed our things to support that. So if you're running email on Azure, Office 365, then that's supported in 3.13 without any problems. But there is another interesting thing that we did while we were building this, because there is this need for getting tokens for these services and refreshing these. And that's been always, kind of hard to do in Flowable, but we've changed it. And Valentin, that's definitely your area of expertise. So maybe you can maybe talk a bit about that.
Yes. So basically, it's about the client credentials flow of OAuth. So rather than using username and password, as you mentioned, we are now going ahead and using an expression. And not sure if you want to type it out or not. It's FLW oath token
Right.
utils get access token, and then you still need to have in your application properties basically that token.
I'll just type it here, right? I mean, I'm not going to find the right thing, but anyway, this is what you'll have to configure. We have documentation for this, put it on the right spot, but that's pretty much guarantees you to get the correct token whenever you're invoking this service behind the scenes. Yeah.
And I think it's also really cool to use that one inside the service registry, for example, when you
Yeah,
there have
exactly.
an OAuth service. It
Correct.
is the client credentials flow, so it's OAuth standard, and you can just generate a new token with that one and
Yeah.
use it to call your OS endpoint.
Yeah. Indeed, that's a very powerful feature. Talking about other powerful features, another thing that a lot of customers have asked and that we added in 3.13 is, let me quickly take one of these examples here, is the ability to, on a model level, to define what variables should be included or not in the index. And you can see here we've got a new property called index filter type, and it has an include and exclude list, depending on whether you want to start with what should be there or what shouldn't be there. But the point is that you can define like a list of variables you want to index. Now, the reason for that is that many customers use a lot of variables, and they all get indexed by default. But sometimes you got really large variables that you don't want to index, and they can blow up your index and they can make your request slow. And to configure this, there is now a way to say, okay, we're only interested in these variables, or the other way around, we should exclude these large variables. And basically that also works on your whole hierarchy. So if you've got like a root, then a process or a case, and then another child process, the whole thing hierarchically works by, if you have a definition, it will take that one, an indexing filter definition. But if you don't, it will look up higher in the hierarchy and take that one. So you don't need to repeat yourself all the way down. And that way you can actually make sure that you're not indexing too much data, as we've seen in many cases happening. And that will solve that problem.
So basically, I can now limit my search index to whatever I need to search for,
Correct.
rather than all the variables which are there. I mean, before
Correct.
I was able to say a variable is transient, but then potentially I don't even have it available when I need it. Now I'm able to specify it in more detail what I would like to have when.
Exactly. It's another axis in the choices that we offer when it comes to variables, right? So definitely something that will be used a lot, I'm sure. Another thing I wanted to highlight is, and this is something specific to CMMN, so in control, something that also a lot of people have asked, that if
So,
you
for the instance, basically.
so in the case instance, there is now a new kind of tab for plan items. And I have now a very simple case. And normally, if you have we've seen cases with a lot of steps, and it's sometimes hard to find what is, which step is in which state. Exactly. And now we have filtering and control, where you can actually filter on all the states that we have in CMN, and also all the types that we have. So this really, from control, allows you to troubleshoot if you don't know why is a certain thing in a certain state, or why is a certain case behaving like it is. We have now, a way to query that basically. And again, if you click it, you can actually see way more details than going into it. Absolutely.
Makes sense.
And
you
and
also
last
have
thing,
the possibility to filter basically if it's ended or not, so you can even go ahead and
absolutely. Another thing that we added, and it's more of a technical thing, but I do want to mention, is we added a support for a couple of more databases. I mean, SQL Server 2019, Oracle 21, MySQL 8. So we're continuously adding these to our QA system. I mean, it's one thing to say it's supported, but what supported really means here is that We have a set of automated tests in our QA, of course, that gets run on every commit into the source code that we do. So that gets tested all the time to all the databases we support. But we also
Yeah.
do manual testing instead of manual testing before each release. So we're sure that it all works. And that is also done on all these databases. So, adding a database to our supported stack is not trivial in that sense, because it
Yeah.
means, running a lot of tests every single day, many, many times. So
The
that definitely want to
automated
mention.
tests, but as well the manual tests for
Yes,
all the different databases. That
exactly,
makes sense.
exactly. Yeah. So that was pretty much the highlights that I kind of wanted to quickly take you through it. So yeah, that's it from my side.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining me today, Joram.
My
I
pleasure. Lots
think
of fun.
there's only one more thing to say. Let's just try it out yourself and get your hands dirty. Thank you very
Exactly.
much.